Hi, welcome to NTACT, the Collaborative's webinar on Improving Secondary Transition Services, Indicator 13. My name is Jess, and today I'll be taking you through the presenter guide for Indicator 13. The agenda for today's meeting includes reviewing Indicator 13 in Transition Law, meeting Indicator 13 requirements, including transition assessment, writing post-secondary goals, transition services, course of study, aligning annual IEP goals, evidence of coordination, and student invitation. These materials will be used for this presentation. Everyone should have a copy of the Indicator 13 checklist, and that can be either version A and/or version B. And then there's a handout of formulas for writing post-secondary goals and annual IEP goals. If you are missing either of these items, you can find them on NTACT-C's website under Indicator 13. Since 1990, when secondary transition was included in IDEA, the field has evolved to expect the following components as critical to a quality transition plan. A transition-rich IEP begins with the adequate transition assessment information, including input from the student, and well-written present levels of academic and functional achievement. From this assessment information, post-secondary goals are identified. The post-secondary goals and the present levels of performance, established through the transition assessment process, allow the team to identify relevant transition services, including the course of study and annual IEP goals. While IDEA 2004 does not specifically define transition assessment, the Division on Career Development and Transition of the Council for Exceptional Children provided this definition, which has been accepted by OSEP. Transition assessment is the ongoing process of collecting data on the student's needs, preferences, and interests as they relate to the demands of current and future working, educational, living, personal, and social environments. Transition assessment serves as the common thread in the transition process, forming the basis for defining goals and services to be included in the IEP. Assessment information is what assists IEP teams in determining what skills need to be taught to a student and what services will be provided that will allow a student to make progress toward their post-secondary goals in education and training, employment, and independent living. The transition assessment process is strengthened when teachers across the curricula collaborate to conduct transition assessments related to specific content areas. Additionally, it should include input, if applicable, from any external providers, such as vocational rehabilitation or VR, if students may receive pre-employment transition services. Of course, families and students contribute information here as well. Transition assessment should gather information in 4 broad areas. The first, academic performance. The second, self-determination. The third, career interests and skills. And the fourth, adaptive behavior and independent living. Newbert and LeConte, 2013, suggested transition assessment information is further strengthened when it includes both skills and aptitudes a student has and skills needed to be successful in the next environment. The information gathered should inform the IEP team's decisions about post-school goals. Transition assessments do several important things. They provide information useful in career counseling. They help students choose an appropriate course of study. They allow the ongoing assessment of performance in coursework and community experiences. They help determine appropriate instructional settings, and they assist with determining necessary accommodations, supports, and services. Let's take a look at a case study for Allison. This is available on the NTAC-C website under Indicator 13. Go ahead and take a few moments to skim her bio and see how the information is summarized and captured in the present levels, and then the subsequent components as related to Indicator 13. Listed on this chart are just a few examples of transition assessments that may be documented as sources of information in Allison's IEP in the present levels of academic and functional performance section, and/or the transition component of the IEP. They include information from college entrance and state testing requirements, formal assessments like the AIR Self-Determination Assessment, Career Employment Education Checklist, and an informal career planning survey for juniors provided by Allison's High School. Other informal assessments are important to document, including any interviews that Allison has completed. Again, transition assessment data may also include information such as progress monitoring data and student preferences. When we get to question number 3 on the Indicator 13 checklist, we will discuss documentation. But for the time being, it's important to know that assessment data must drive IEP development. Beginning with multiple ongoing age-appropriate assessments, we can be certain Allison's preferences, strengths, needs, and interests are documented within her transition plan and IEP. While the field of secondary transition has generally agreed on what should be in the transition component of an IEP, beginning with IDEA 2004, states were held accountable for ensuring secondary transition planning was addressed in all IEPs of students age 16 and older. In fact, states must show that 100% of all students' IEPs ages 16 and older are compliant. As such, states provide an annual performance report to the Office of Special Education Programs within the U.S. Department of Education each year on what is called Indicator 13. This is what Indicator 13 says. Percent of youth with IEPs age 16 and above with an IEP that includes appropriate measurable post-secondary goals that are annually updated, and they're based upon an age-appropriate transition assessment. Transition services, including courses of study that will reasonably enable the student to meet those post-secondary goals, and annual IEP goals related to the student's transition service needs. There must also be evidence that the student was invited to the IEP team meeting where transition services are to be discussed, and when appropriate, a representative of any participating agency likely to be responsible for providing or paying for transition services, such as pre-employment transition services, was invited to the IEP team meeting with the prior consent of the parent or student if the student has reached the age of majority. Altogether, there are 8 criteria included in this compliance indicator. All 8 must be present in a student's IEP for the IEP to be compliant with the state performance plan indicator. Theoretically, and guidance from the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition and OSEP would indicate that the quality transition planning often leads to compliance as well. So the two do not need to be viewed as separate goals. Okay, so now we're going to review the Indicator 13 checklist. You may have version A and or version B. You can choose the checklist used by your state or district. to follow along with here. The Technical Assistance Center, funded by OSEP, created this Indicator 13 checklist to reflect the law. The Indicator 13 checklist addresses 8 questions. We'll look at each one. The first question is there an appropriate measurable post-secondary goal or goals in this area? Number 2, is or are the post-secondary goal or goals updated annually? Question 3, is there evidence that the measurable post-secondary goal or goals were based on an age-appropriate transition assessment? Question 4, are there transition services in the IEP that will reasonably enable the student to meet his or her post-secondary goal or goals? Question 5, do the transition services include courses of study that will reasonably enable the student to meet his or her post-secondary goals? Is or are there annual IEP goals related to the student's transition services needs? Question 7, is there evidence that the student was invited to the IEP team meeting where transition services were discussed? And finally, question 8, if appropriate, is there evidence that a representative of any participating agency was invited to the IEP team meeting with the prior consent of the parent or student who has reached the age of majority? So you can see based on the law how we've derived the 8-item checklist to reflect all of the requirements to meet Indicator 13. Next, we will address each of the components of Indicator 13 from that checklist in the following slides as it relates to Allison's case study example. Now that we've gone through each of those 8 questions, we're going to focus on each one, starting with writing post-secondary goals. Identifying post-secondary goals is essential in developing a transition component that reflects students' needs, strengths, and desires. You can think of it as backward planning. So you start with the proposed outcomes or post-school goals, and then develop annual IEP goals and transition services that will support students in meeting those outcomes. A measurable post-secondary goal is something that can be counted. It's a goal that provides an outcome for the student, not just a process. There should be at least one goal for education or training and employment for all students. Additionally, some students, based on assessment information, may require a goal for independent living. When writing post-secondary goals, there are a few questions you should ask yourself. First, where is the student going to work or engage in productive activities after graduation? Second, where and how is the student going to continue to learn and or develop skills after graduation? Third, where is the student going to live and how is he or she going to access adult services, participate in the community, and have fun after graduation? These 3 questions can guide you towards making some post-secondary goals along with the transition assessment information you collect. This is a basic formula that provides guidelines for writing a measurable post-secondary goal. Just an example. So we have after high school or completion of high school or graduation, the student will, you can enter a behavior and then specify where and how. Let's take a quick look back at Allison's assessment data. We need the assessment results before we can develop any post-secondary goals. So take a quick moment to read the assessment data one more time. Okay, so based on that assessment data, we've provided some examples here of post-secondary goals that are based on the transition assessment results. We know that education and training and employment are the two required post-secondary goal areas for all students. So for education and training, we might say, after graduation from high school, Allison will enroll in a four-year college and pursue a bachelor's degree in child development. That's something we could measure. We could definitely say yes or no, did Allison enroll? Second, an employment goal for Allison. After earning her four-year degree, Allison will obtain full-time employment working with children. So between the education and training goal and the employment goal, we've covered those two required areas. But we know that some students, based on assessment data, might also have an independent living goal. So here we have for Allison, after high school, she will self-advocate for accommodations in college. Additionally, after high school, Allison will use strategies to effectively manage her time so that she successfully meets her deadlines for college. The example post-secondary goals we just reviewed meet the indicator 13 standards for checklist item number 1. Here are the reasons why. First, these post-secondary goals reflect the data gathered through the transition assessment process. Second, the goals are something Allison will do after graduation from high school. And third, the goals are observable and measurable. A post-school goal in independent living, as I mentioned, is an option for an IEP team to include. It's not required for all students, but it should be considered for all students. A little bit of further information on independent living post-secondary goals. Independent living post-school goals might focus on areas beyond just residential independence. They may include concepts of financial literacy, transportation, healthcare and well-being, self-determination, social and communication success, self-care skills, and other aspects of adult living that may be important goals to plan and instruct for while students are in high school. This is a transition slide introducing updated post-secondary goals. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the second item on the indicator 13 checklist. The second question on that checklist is or are the post-secondary goal or goals updated annually? So as you can tell, this question requires a yes or no answer and a statement in a student's IEP or transition component indicating that post-secondary goals had been reviewed and updated based on appropriate assessment information. Here we have an example of how we would indicate that. The example reads, in her present levels, the following is written. Allison wants to work with children after obtaining a four-year degree, and we're basing this on results from her junior year survey. A non-example here would be Allison will get a job after high school, which is the same goal from her IEP in 9th grade. So the first example, the good example, meets the indicator 13 standards for item number 2, because post-secondary goals are identified in each required area and they reflect the current assessment data. We can tell that because it says we pulled the results from her junior year survey. That non-example does not meet the indicator 13 standards for item number 2 because it uses assessment data from previous school years. So our current assessment information from her junior year indicates her post-secondary goals should be updated and have more specificity than in 9th grade. Okay, next we are going to discuss age-appropriate transition assessments. We know that we began our process with transition assessments, including ongoing assessments, assessments that are age-appropriate, assessments from multiple sources, and a mixture of both formal and informal assessments. Because we began the transition planning process by collecting age-appropriate transition assessment data from multiple sources, We meet the indicator 13 standards for question number 3, which is there evidence that the measurable post-secondary goals were based on age-appropriate transition assessment? Transition assessment is an ongoing process of collecting data from multiple sources across multiple skill areas to make decisions about post-school goals and the supports needed to achieve them. It is not a single checklist or instrument. The data collected should be discussed with the IEP team, including the student, and not just simply filed away. By age appropriate, the expectation is that assessments used are gathering information to inform post-school decisions and gather information on the student's preferences, interests, needs, and strengths, all relevant to adult life. So we mentioned a moment ago, transition assessments may be formal or informal. Formal assessments typically include published tests or normed tests in which a student's score is compared to the scores of others. These assessments can serve as a good starting point. Informal assessments include things like observing the student in academic and work experiences, talking with the student about likes and dislikes, or curriculum-based assessments. Informal assessments are often teacher-made and do not result in a numerical score. There's no requirement in place that a specific number of formal or informal assessments be used. However, it is recommended that multiple sources are used, so a mixture of both. Transition assessment is an individualized process designed to answer 3 broad questions about a person. We have to consider the following questions. First, where is the individual presently? Second, where is the individual going? And third, how do we get the individual there? Depending on your state or district form, you will have specific requirements for documenting transition assessment results. But regardless of your state or district system, it's important that enough information be included in the present levels or elsewhere in the IEP that someone could easily determine that assessment results were used to identify post-school goals. This is a transition slide introducing transition services. Transition services are a coordinated set of activities that promote movement from school to the post-school activities. Appropriate transition services support attainment of the post-school goals. It should be pointed out that although the regulations state the coordinated set of activities must include instruction, community experiences, and the development of employment and other adult living objectives, there might be occasions when certain of these services are not provided to the student. Each transition service identified should be something that will occur during this IEP or during the next calendar year. Additionally, the person or persons responsible and a timeline for providing these services should be clearly identified. Students differ from one another in terms of the nature and severity of their disability, personality, abilities, cultural values, and interests. Therefore, the type and amount of transition services needed may also differ from student to student. Here are a few examples of transition services. First, instruction. Teaching academics, work-related skills, community skills, or self-determination skills. A second service area might be related services, and this could include transportation, occupational or physical therapy, or a job coach. A third example of a transition service area is community experiences. This may include work-based learning, daily living, or visits to local colleges. Employment and other post-school adult living objectives might include financial planning, healthcare, self-advocacy, or self-determination. Within daily living skills, services may include learning to drive, banking, healthcare, or self-sufficiency. And finally, functional vocational evaluation may include formalized employment assessments. When determining transition services for a student, you should ask yourself these questions. First, what experiences must the student participate in this academic year that are necessary for achieving the identified post-secondary goals? Second, what services and specific instruction are needed this year for the student to develop skills and knowledge to attain their post-secondary goals? And lastly, do we know enough about the student's vocational skills to identify an appropriate post-secondary employment goal or design activities to support the identified goal? Let's consider this in terms of Allison. Indicator 13, item number 4 asks, are there transition services in the IEP that will reasonably enable the student to meet his or her post-secondary goals? Here are some examples of services in alignment with Allison's post-school goals. In the area of education and training, Allison will receive support filling out the FAFSA, and this will be the responsibility of the FAFSA representative by the second quarter of her senior year. Additionally, Allison will receive assistance applying for college. The person responsible will be her case manager, and the timeline is by her second quarter of her senior year. In the area of employment, Allison will receive a job shadow experience opportunity with children. This will be coordinated by the work program coordinator by the fourth quarter of her junior year. Additionally, a service in employment will be part-time employment in a position related to working with children. This will be arranged by her work program coordinator by the first quarter of her senior year. Lastly, in the area of independent living, Allison will receive driver's education provided by the driver's education teacher by the second semester. Here are the reasons that these transition services meet the indicator 13 requirements for checklist item number 4. First, these transition services reflect the assessment data gathered. Second, the transition services are indicated and they're relevant to each of Allison's post-secondary goals. Finally, the timelines and persons responsible for each service are clearly indicated. This is a transition slide introducing course of study. A course of study is a multi-year description of coursework to achieve the student's desired post-school goals from the student's current to anticipated exit year. For a course of study, educators should consider whether or not the student is taking courses that allow him or her to meet their post-secondary goals. When determining course of study, you should ask yourself these questions. First, is a course of study already identified for this student? Second, is this course of study aligned with the student's post-secondary goals? Here's an example course of study for Allison. The final 3 semesters of her courses of study are listed, reflecting state's graduation requirements, and the team has identified electives of psychology, cooperative work experience, child development, and resource supports. Indicator 13, item number 5 asks, is or are there annual IEP goals related to the student's transition services needs? This course of study meets indicator 13 standards for the following reasons. First, the coursework listed is appropriate for Allison's post-secondary goals of attending college. She must graduate from high school in order to do this, and pursuing a career in early childhood education. Second, the courses listed reflect Allison's current and anticipated graduation date. Next, we're going to transition into aligning annual IEP goals with post-secondary goals and transition services. Annual IEP goals are included in the IEP that support the student's progress toward post-secondary goals. There should be, at minimum, one annual IEP goal to support each post-secondary goal. This formula provides guidelines for writing a measurable annual IEP goal. The components included in this formula are recommended as best practice. Based on your district requirements, you may or may not include all components. What is important related to today's content is that the annual goal is relevant to the student making progress toward their post-secondary goals. Allison had an example post-secondary goal in education and training. This goal was, after graduation from high school, Allison will attend a four-year college and take courses in child development. Here's an annual IEP goal that supports the post-secondary goal in education and training. Given direct instruction to use a graphic organizer for pre-writing expository essays, Allison will complete the graphic organizer with 80% accuracy as measured by teacher rubrics by the end of the first school semester. Indicator 13, item number 6 asks, is or are there annual IEP goals related to the student's transition services needs? These goal statements meet indicator 13 standards for item number 6 for the following reasons. First, the goals support Allison's post-secondary goal of attending a four-year college, as well as transition services to prepare for that goal. Second, the annual IEP goal includes a condition, measurable behaviors, criteria, and a time frame. Additionally, Allison had a post-secondary employment goal, which was after earning her four-year degree, Allison will obtain full-time employment working with children. Here's an annual IEP goal that supports this post-secondary goal. Given 2 job shadowing experiences, one in each of the following, early childhood education and elementary education, Allison will identify her likes and dislikes of each setting by completing a job site interest survey and verbally describing her preferences during the duration of this IEP. This annual IEP goal meets indicator 13 standards for item number 6 for the following reasons. First, the behavior of identifying likes and dislikes of each early childhood setting is a logical step in helping Allison narrow her career path for after college. Second, annual goals may also provide Allison with information that helps her select courses in college that best prepare her for a career in early childhood education. And finally, the annual IEP goal includes a condition, measurable behavior, criteria, and a time frame. Lastly, Allison had a post-secondary goal in the area of independent living. This goal read, after high school, Allison will use strategies to effectively manage her time so that she successfully meets her deadlines for college. Here is an annual IEP goal that supports this post-secondary goal. Given an assignment notebook, Allison will write all assignments in her notebook for all subjects for 15 consecutive days by the end of the semester. This goal meets indicator 13 standards for item 6 because it relates to Allison's current needs to be successful in adult life. And again, it also includes an effective condition, measurable behavior, criteria, and a time frame. This is a transition slide for invitation to student. Item number 7 on the indicator 13 checklist asks, is there evidence that the student was invited to the IEP team meeting where transition services were discussed? This question requires a yes or no answer and a statement in a student's IEP or transition component indicating that post-secondary goals had been reviewed and updated based on appropriate assessment information. Here is an example and a non-example of how to indicate that the student was invited to the IEP meeting. An example includes notification of conference, including Allison as an invitee. A non-example is Allison's signature on the IEP. This non-example does not meet the standards for item number 7 for the following reasons. First, there is no evidence that the student was provided advance notice of the IEP meeting where transition services would be discussed. Second, attending the IEP does not indicate that Allison was invited prior to the IEP, as is required. A little bit of background information here. It is important to note that student participation in the IEP planning process and meeting are important. However, actual student participation is not a required component for Indicator 13. It is recommended that every effort be made to empower students to participate meaningfully in the IEP meeting. Next, we're going to move on to evidence of coordination. Indicator 13, number 8 asks, if appropriate, is there evidence that a representative of any participating agency was invited to the IEP meeting with the prior consent of the parent or the student if the student has reached the age of majority? Additionally, you must have parent or child, if the child is the age of majority, permission to invite the agencies to the meeting in the first place. If an agency is likely to provide a transition service or be of assistance in the transition planning process, the parent or student should be asked to give permission for them to attend. Permissions and agency invitation must be documented as determined by your state or district for this item to be compliant. Here's an example of proper documentation of interagency collaboration. A consent form signed by Allison, who is 18, indicating that the local education agency may contact the Disability Services Office at the university of her choosing. Additionally, an invitation to conference in the file mailed to an individual in the Disability Services Office of the university to which Allison wants to attend. These examples meet the Indicator 13 requirement for item number 8 for the following reasons. First, parental consent or consent of the student if the student has reached age of majority is required in order to contact any adult agency and release student information. Second, an invitation documents that a representative from VR and DSA were invited to attend the meeting. While today's case study focused on Allison, there are more case studies with examples and non-examples for Alex and Carla. These and more case studies are all available at www.transitionta.org. This concludes our presentation on Indicator 13. Thank you so much for watching, and feel free to reach out to us in the following ways if you have questions or would like further information.